Good morning and welcome to today's Mental Health Week Forum. My name's Chris Jones and I'm the Chief Executive of Anglicare in Tasmania, and I'd like to begin by acknowledging and paying respects to the Tasmanian Aboriginal community as the traditional and original owners and continuing custodians of this land. Today we will be hearing about Anglicare's latest research into the importance of natural supports in recovering from mental illness. After that we've heard about that research, Helen Glover will be our guest speaker, and she will talk about the role of services in helping people to live a life beyond those services, or as we know, Helen, anything else that comes to her mind. Anglicare Social Action and Research Centre is currently researching how natural supports promote recovery from mental illness. The key findings of this research are summarised in a brief which we will have available today, and I ask you to take a copy with you when you leave. Natural supports are the types of everyday interactions that we all experience. They include relationships with family, friends and social networks such as sporting clubs and churches. They also include interactions at community places like libraries, cafes, gyms, supermarkets and local parks. They are the kind of interactions we all value in our lives and which make the difference between isolation and depression and enjoying our lives to the full. For this research, we interviewed people living with mental illness across Tasmania and asked them to tell us about how these kinds of support help them to reclaim their lives and enable them to lead full and rewarding lives in the community. I would like to thank the people who agreed to participate in this research and share their stories and experiences with us. To a person, they told us that natural supports are vitally important to them. They're important because they foster a sense of well-being and belonging. They help to counter feelings of loneliness and isolation. They improve a person's quality of life. It is important to feel included and welcomed by the community as a whole. According to the people we spoke to, this was a key to recovery. However, we were also told of instances where they felt that the community was not inclusive in libraries, cafes, workplaces and churches. So part of our message from today is that it's vital that as a community we are welcoming and inclusive of all people. We need to show a greater understanding and awareness of mental health and provide safe and welcoming spaces. According to the statistics, almost 1 in 2 Australians will experience mental illness at some point in their lives. For 1 in 5 people, this will occur within the next 12 months. And although mental illness is common, many people do not seek support or medical help, largely because they feel the stigma and discrimination that still exists in the community. Many people with mental illness will recover and lead full and rewarding lives. And a key to this is feeling included within the community and accessing and receiving appropriate support, including these very important natural supports. The research describes the significant role that formal services have in assisting people to access and sustain their natural supports. So I'd like to ask Naomi, who's our principal researcher, if she can come and say a few words about the research and its key findings. Naomi.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you everyone for coming. A big turnout, good to see, so thank you. Now bear with me, I think this is on. If it's not, I'll call on Margie to come and help. Firstly, I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank all of the people who spoke to us so that we could undertake this research, both people who use services and people who provide services. Without you, obviously none of this research would have been possible, so thank you. So, what is the research really about? I guess at its basic level, or at its outset, it was about finding out what helps people to recover from mental illness. And the starting point here, I suppose, is that the people we spoke to were very positive about recovery. And we talked to a number of people across Tasmania with a lived experience of mental illness. And most of them told us very positive stories about leading full and rewarding lives in the community. We heard a lot of inspiring stories about people coming back to work, taking part in education, volunteering, helping out in their community, engaging in all kinds of community activities. But what we really wanted to know was, what was it that allowed people or helped people to be able to engage and live full and rewarding lives? And too often we hear about the role of formal services, obviously a very important role, but the focus tends to be on what formal services can do for people. And what the research that we've conducted told us is that natural supports also play a very important role in people's lives. And as we've just heard from Chris, natural supports are really those kinds of things that just occur naturally, for want of a better word, in our everyday life. Relationships with our family, our friends, peers, going to work, going to the local cafe. The people that we spoke to had a vast array of supports that they drew on. It was family, friends, and people, but it also included relationships with their pets, the natural environment. Some people emphasise gardening, sitting alone, working, writing, reading, meditating. It works. And I suppose the thing that we really wanted to say is that none of this is really a very big surprise. Natural supports are important for everyone. We all rely on natural supports to lesser and greater extents throughout our entire lives for many, many different reasons. They enhance our sense of well-being, they increase our sense of belonging. People with mental illness are no different from anyone else in the community. Everyone wants to be included, everyone wants to participate, we all want friends, we all want to socialise, we all want to be included and welcomed. And it is really the feelings of engagement and well-being that come from these natural supports that were identified by the people that we spoke to as being important for their recovery. It was the feelings of inclusion, engagement, that allowed people to build confidence to be able to lead full and rewarding lives in the community. Unfortunately, however, it's not always such a positive story, and we didn't always hear only positive things. Many of the service providers we spoke to indicated that a lot of the people that they support don't have good natural support networks in their lives, and this was also supported by some of the people that we spoke with. Most of the people we spoke with had good natural supports, but there were some who said that they didn't have many natural supports that they could rely on. People told us that it's not always easy to identify natural supports, it's not always easy to access natural supports, and sometimes it's really not easy to maintain those relationships or maintain those natural supports. And the lack of natural supports further reinforces feelings of isolation, feelings of exclusion, which then makes it increasingly difficult to access natural supports. So this left us with the question of what do we do for people? How do we help people who have no natural supports? And as we've just heard from Chris, the community is a big help. It's important that as a community that we're inclusive and welcoming in all of our spaces, from shops to cafes to libraries to people in parks to everyday interactions that you might have with anyone. But one of the other key findings of this research has been that there's a key role for formal services. Formal services have an important role to play in helping people to identify and access their natural supports. And we spoke to a number of support providers or workers around the state. We conducted focus groups in each of the 3 regions of the state. And the workers that we spoke to had many, many strategies and many ideas for how they could help people to connect in with natural supports. It ranged from conducting social activities, providing opportunities for social interaction, included building confidence and skills levels so that people could identify and build their own natural supports outside of the formal service framework. It was also about promoting activities and promoting engagement in things that people showed an interest in. But as a lot of you will know and can imagine, it's not always easy. There are major challenges that services face in helping people to engage with natural supports. We heard a lot of stories about the lack of natural support options, about the lack of opportunities to participate in the community. And we also heard that there is a danger of formal services themselves replacing the role of family and friends, so replacing the role of natural supports that already exist in a person's life. So to sum up, and one of the things from the research really is that what we've discovered to some extent is common sense. And what we really learned was that recovery, leading a full and rewarding life, is not about natural supports or formal services. It's about both. And it's about how they come together and work together to build rewarding lives for people. They're both important. The people that we spoke to that had good natural support networks were really, really positive about the networks. They really valued the amount of support and the amount of assistance they gave. The people that we spoke to who had few natural support networks voiced a real concern that that's what they wanted. They wanted more natural supports, and they also voiced that they felt that formal services were going to be helpful in helping them to build those natural support networks. So as I say, it is about formal services and natural supports working together. So finally, I just want to thank again the people who took part in the research. One of the components of the research was that people took photos of things in their community, of places, people that they felt were natural supports, and some of those photos are replicated or reproduced in the brief that's been handed around. The final research report is just entering its final stages of editing and design. So the report should be available, reluctant to give it a date. Late October. We'll go with late October. The details of where you can access the report are on the back of the brief, but you'll be able to access it from the Anglicare website and also just by contacting Anglicare direct. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you for coming and thank you for listening. And I'll just hand back to Chris.
Thank you, Naomi. For those who haven't yet met Helen Glover, Helen is an internationally renowned lecturer and trainer who provides consultancy and training services on the opportunities, challenges and tensions of creating recovery-orientated practice within services. She's passionate about these issues and she uses her professional background in social work and education, as well as her own experience, to expand and challenge the concepts of recovery-orientated practice within the mental health sector. Does that sound about right, Helen? Helen comes to us as a critical friend. She's been someone that Anglicares had the pleasure and sometimes the pain of working with over several years as we've tried to make sure our services do what they need to do. And that sometimes includes getting out of the way. Will you join me in welcoming Helen?
Ooh, let's try that again. Okay. Yeah, so good morning, everyone. That's a lot better. Thank you for that. Now I feel welcome. Now I feel a little bit safe up here as opposed to up here by myself. It's a great pleasure to be invited here today to speak with you and to kind of continue these conversations and to think deeply and critically and provocatively around the role of natural supports and the role of natural environments in people's lives. Before I start, I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land that we meet today and for their wisdom that they offer us and continue to offer us about the concepts of recovery, but also the concepts of natural support. If there's not a community that can teach us about natural more than we've got our Indigenous brothers and sisters. I also like to acknowledge the people who've struggled and triumphed over the experience of mental distress around the world that contribute to this knowledge base. This knowledge base that we're talking today, that hasn't come from a professional knowledge base. It's come from the mouths of people who have said what helps and what hinders. And it asks us, when we're in a service provider role or when we're in the role of being the other in someone's life, to listen really deeply and clearly about how they're asking us to be, what they're asking us to create in terms of environments and possibilities for us all to thrive. The whole concept of natural resources has invited me to really think and reflect about my own journey and the journeys of others that I've had the privilege to walk alongside, and think about what is natural about it. I work with some other colleagues in a consultancy team, and we all draw upon our lived experience. And I asked a couple of weeks ago, when I was thinking about this presentation, I asked them a question: what do we put our ability to reclaim a life down to? You know, what would we name? And we all sat around this circle. We had good coffee. We sat around this circle, and all of us received services in the mid to late 80s and early 90s, when there weren't the plethora of services that we have today. They were quite lean services back then. You had hospital, you had outpatient, you had day centres, a bit of a community nurse occasionally, but that was about it. So all of us came to the conclusion that the fact that we didn't have a lot of services was probably the very thing that helped us to get on with life. The fact that we didn't have, the employment service, the FAM service, the day-to-day living service, the adult lifestyle support service, the this service, the that service, that we didn't get trapped. Can I do this?
So is this still the wrong one?
No, that's the right one. But it's not showing. You've got to do it. Here we go. That we didn't get trapped in services. That we had to draw on ourselves, to find something deep within ourselves, to draw upon each other about how do we use those resources around us to support each other. Way before peer support became even trendy in this country. I remember, meeting with people who would negotiate with each other. How can I support you and you support me, because we haven't got a lot of other things in this community? And it saddens me somehow that those very natural ways of being in each other's lives have kind of slipped to the background a little bit. And I think we have to come back and listen to some of those wisdoms about how we bring them forward. So this became a little bit what my life looked like in those early days. It became service saturated. Although we didn't have a lot of services, I lived in a service. So from Monday to Friday, I would go to the day centre. I used to call it day care, because that's what it felt like. I'd get dropped off in the morning with my kindy bag, and I'd get picked up in the afternoon, and I'd made a tiled ashtray, even though I'd never been a smoker in my life, to go, look what I've made today. And it kind of didn't feel good. But anyway, I transgress. The question we have to ask ourselves around natural supports is about, what are we trying to support people to be? There's a friend of mine in the UK, Chris Munt, and he says it really eloquently. He said recovery for him in his life is about creating opportunities and possibilities in which he can avail himself of in order to realise his potential. That last bit is really important. He wasn't talking about to have opportunities and environments in order to kind of be wrapped up in bubble wrap, but to realise his potential. Is there anyone in this room that didn't get up today to realise their potential? Is there anyone that is born on this planet that is not there to realise our potential? And somewhere along my story, and I think the stories of others, we've forgotten that that's what we get up each day to do. Not to stay the same, not to create a status quo, but to realise our potential. It doesn't get much more complicated. So then we come back and ask, well, what are those opportunities and environments that we need to avail ourselves of? So I want to share with you some stories this morning, both mine and other people, but they've given me some really strong lessons that I don't let go of. And when someone invites me into a space or an opportunity or an environment that I think my potential is going to be risked, I can't go there. I have to say no to that. So I don't like photos very much, and this is one of the few you'll see of in my earlier life. This is my husband Paul and myself. This is on our honeymoon 29 years ago. My hair colour has changed a number of times, and he doesn't have a moustache anymore, thank goodness, and he's now grey. But 29 years of marriage, he says he gets less for murder. But anyway, before illness came to visit me, I probably had the same identity that most people of that age had. I was Helen. I used to introduce myself as Helen. I was a wife. I was a teacher. I loved to travel. I was a friend, and people were a friend to me. I was a house owner, or more accurately, a mortgage payer. I could kill plants with a glance. And there are probably people in this audience that could attest that I can still do that. I was an aunt, taxpayer, gym goer. And probably the quality that I'm most known for is I was stubborn as an ox. Now, pretty boring, pretty normal, isn't it? I mean, you think back to when you were that age, you probably have similar things around that. What I noticed about that is that I didn't have one thing that identified me. I had many things. And the things that identified me were freely available, natural occurring opportunities to work, to play, to love. They're the things that shape who we are. When I became unwell, spectacularly unwell in the playground of a high school, not the place to become unwell, some of this stuff started to disappear. Some of the stuff, I started to lose opportunities to hold on to this. What did I lose? I lost a sense of working. So when you take work out of the equation, you lose your sense to contribute, you lose your sense of, competency, you lose your sense of having conversations with people during the day. 8 hours out of your day, you're by yourself instead of working and teaching. I couldn't travel anymore because I was in hospital. I used to go on outings, but that probably wasn't the same. Friends came to visit me for a couple of weeks when I was in hospital with the hope that this would pass. But after months and months in hospital, the people coming didn't come anymore. And so the only conversations I got to have were with fellow patients and with clinicians. So my conversations started to centre around what I call illness-saturated conversations. So the only things I talked about was stuff to do that we had in common. The thing that we had in common was illness, or treating illness. So that I didn't get to go to the gym because I got to go on walks. I lost my right to be a taxpayer. Now, there's probably many of you sitting in the audience right now going, oh, that'd be good. But it's not. I remember recently, or a couple of years ago, I employed someone who was working their way off the disability support pension. And it got to a stage where she was earning and working more hours that a tax was going to have to be taken out of her next pay. And in my heart, I thought, oh, she's probably going to tell me she'll go back to just working at that sub-level. I had to challenge myself about this afterwards. So I told her, I said, you'll notice in your next pay that tax is going to be taken out. And she looked at me and she had tears coming down her face, and she said, "I've arrived. I've come back home. I'm allowed to exist in the community again." And I had to challenge myself that I even thought she'd say, "Oh, no, I'll work less hours next week so I can keep the disability support pension." So to lose something, to gain it back, even if it's to pay tax, tells you I have a right to be in this community. I lost my ability to kill plants with a glance. You wonder why. You're in a contained environment. You're in a sterile environment where plants are considered something that could be used as a weapon, especially in Queensland Health. So I didn't even get the opportunity of having living things around you to kill. So I lost my privileges of being an aunt. And people go, "Oh, well, that's because you didn't see your nieces and nephews, or you weren't, living in your family." No, that's not the reason. The reason was my family members, and some of them are medically trained with doctor in front of their name, thought what I had was contagious. So to be with my nieces and nephews was a risk for them. So it's probably been only in the last 8 or 9 years that I've had the privilege of being an aunt again and to re-establish that opportunity. I lost my privileges of knowing that I was a house owner, because although my name still existed on the title deed, it was Paul who was paying the mortgage out of what he was earning. I wasn't contributing to that. I lost my sense of being stubborn as an ox, because you learn very quickly that to be stubborn in a mental health system or any service is not going to work. And I lost my sense of being a wife. Now, that's not because I was in hospital and Paul was at home. It's because people started to relate to him as my carer. And although Paul had wisdom beyond his years, and he would constantly say to me, "I am not your carer. You care for me as much as I care for you. I am your husband." And those words, even though I didn't understand them back then, they were really, really important to hear. Even now, that he was probably the only person in my life that was able not to respond to me through an illness. Now, the reason why I lost my sense of being a wife was not because he wasn't holding that space, but everyone else in my life was relating to him as my carer. And ultimately, I lose a sense of being Helen. So this is how the subtleness, the powerfulness of this subtleness invites us into a sense of difference. Invites us to believe that we don't have a rightful place to exist in our community. Invites us to say, "I've got to stay inside my lounge room. I can't even go outside because this is not a place for me." So these are subtle messages that happen all day, every day, to the point that we start to see a different truth emerge, a different construction. And so if those things have gone, I had to replace it with something. So what was it? I started to see myself as a patient, consumer, carer, service user, participant. Forgot to introduce myself by my name. I tell people the multiple diagnoses, and if I had to write them down, there usually wasn't enough space on the form. When people ask me how you're going, I say, "I don't know, you'll have to ask the nurse." I'd lost the sense of even being able to determine whether I was okay or not, because other people, experts in my life, had started to make those determinations for me. Medications were important not for the drug, but they told me the time, and that time was passing. That it was either morning medication, lunchtime medication, afternoon medication, sleeping time medication. Reports and documentation held my story, written by someone else, usually filed in their filing cabinet. Hospital admissions and service appointments and more service appointments and more service appointments became how my structure of my day. I didn't have the things that everyone else had. I had service appointments. Day centres, as I said before, became the focus of making craft. 6 certificates validated my distress. And ultimately, instead of Helen, I become a caree. So this is how I lived for a number of years, and I imagine there are people in this room that share a similar story, and I imagine there are many people out there that are still living this story today. But it doesn't have to be. It's a constructed story. And I found ways, the things that helped me to undo this story, to find Helen again, were not services. So I can remember this one time I was really good at something, and it was escaping from hospital. One day I'm going to write a book on all my great escapes because I think some of them are pretty creative. But this one day, and this wasn't a plan, it was just impulse. I took off from this hospital, it was in Brisbane, and I took off down Ipswich Road, and I thought my little legs were going to make it all the way home. And I'm running and walking and running and walking, thinking I've got to get somewhere. I knew what I was going from, but I really didn't know where I was going to. And I only got about 1.5 kilometres, I would say. And I came across this little place at Stones Corner. And it was the Salvation Army Youth Outreach Service. And I thought, they'll keep me safe. They won't send me back to hospital. They'll be nice to me. So I went in there with great expectation that this is going to be something different and that they were going to help me because I needed a lot of help. That's the story I was telling myself. And in this youth outreach service, there was all these kids, kids that were living on the street, kids that couldn't stay at school, kids that were struggling. And there was these 2 Salvation Army officers, Lyle and Sue. And they looked at me standing there and they said, "Can we help you?" And I said, not the time to tell them I've just escaped from the mental health unit. So I kind of switched straight away. I said, "Can I help you? I could be a volunteer here." And then they said to me, "What have you got to offer?" I said, and I was drawing, I was like, "I've been a teacher." "Great, you can work with kids." And so straight away, they needed me. For the first time in a long time, someone needed me. And they didn't care. They got to find out that I escaped from the mental health unit, and they got to find out that I had a mental illness, but they didn't care. They didn't care because they needed me. And I felt that. So every day, I was supposed to be going to the daycare centre up the road at the hospital, but I'd escape and come to the Salvos because that was my daily work. And I'd go there and I was needed, not because someone had sent me there, not that a service had think it would be good for you to volunteer. I found it. And one day, Sue said to me, I used to follow she was a social worker, and she used to go out and work with kids under the bridges and living on the streets. And I used to follow like baby steps. Wherever Sue went, I went, and I'd be walking around. And she just said to me one day, she said, "Have you ever thought of doing this?" I said, "Doing what?" She said, "Being a social worker." I said, "I can't, I've got a mental illness." She said, "So what? So what?" And they were the most powerful, invitational, challenging 2 words I had heard in a long time. So what? She didn't make a plan out for me and make it happen. All she said was, "So what?" And that "so what" settled in me. And I started to ask myself the same question. So what? So what? And that "so what," if she had never ever asked and said "so what," I probably wouldn't be standing here today. I probably would still be stuck in many, many services around me, circling around me. What that place did for me was tell me that I didn't have to be better in order to start living life. And I think this is a really important message for us to bring home, whether we're someone with a lived experience, whether we're a family member, whether we're a service provider, whether we're a community member. I think we've bought into the belief that someone has to be all better and all shiny and all ready before we can step back into life. Paradoxically, it's only when we start to live life that we get better. And this is hard because a lot of our programs, a lot of the things that we've created have invited people to step out of life, to not go there. I'm just jumping here. So this message about things happen, but it's in the living of life that we get better. So another story that came to me, and this is something that was said to me, I was a CEO of an organisation in the UK that ran an alternative to hospital. And the thing that was different to this program was that every single staff member was a peer. We're yet to see anything at this level in this country, but maybe one day we will. Anyway, M was a person who was referred by the NHS to come and stay in this crisis house instead of in hospital. And she'd been once or twice to this space instead of hospital. And it was an active space. It was a space where it was kind of like you need to look after the recovery space as opposed to we're going to care for you. And one day, these couple of days I've been writing this submission, and for those of you who have written submissions before, you become like a bear with a sore head. And the staff were tiptoeing around me, like, don't rock her, she's fragile. So it was kind of like that very tense time. So I'm in my office, and I'm head down, and I'm typing anyway. M just drops in. And she said, Helen, I'd like to let you know that you give me hope that I can recover. And I'm typing like this, and I look up, I go, oh, and she disappeared. And I thought, wow, I didn't even know she was here. How do I give her hope that I can recover? I've not even had a conversation with her, and started to think about this. And later that day, I was down making a cup of tea, and she was there making a cup of tea for herself, and I said, Em, can I ask you a question? I said, you said to me, you dropped into my office, you said, I give you hope that you can recover, and I don't know how I do that because I'm sorry, I didn't even know you were here. I've been so busy doing this. I haven't had a conversation with you about that. Can you tell me how I do that? She said, She said, before I came here, I used to think I had to be all better before I could get a job, all better before I could get a boyfriend, all better before I could go to uni, all better before I could move out of mum and dad's house, all better, all better, all better. And she said to me, I see you, and you're the CEO, and some days you're not very well, but you're still the CEO. And she said, just by you tell me that I don't have to wait to start living life. And that was a really important message back to me. And it reminded me that how tempting it is for us to wait to start living life. The third story I want to share with you is that I had someone challenge me. Challenges are good. Sometimes painful, as Chris would say, but challenges are good. And I was living this life as if I was sick 365 days and a quarter. Don't forget the quarter because it's really important. A year. I dressed in it, I lived it, I kind of wore my illness as my t-shirt. And one day someone said to me, how many days are you sick? A year. And I said, 365 days and a quarter. And this person challenged me. She said, I know it must feel like that, but I know it's really hard to even be distressed for 24 hours at the same level, let alone 365 days and a quarter. And so she challenged me and she said, I wonder if you think about the last 12 months, how many days would you have had symptoms that actually stopped you doing anything? Now, I like this person. And I took her challenge instead of brushing it off. And I went home and I thought about it. I went back through my diaries, I went back through my calendars, and I started to add up how many days illness would have stopped me. And I had an aha moment. I realised even some of those days when I was in hospital, I probably was okay. It's just I was waiting for the doctors to get to that understanding too. So I worked out for this particular year that I was looking at, I only had 45 days. Now, my maths is pretty basic, But I think that works out to about 320 and a quarter days where illness wasn't my friend or didn't need to be my friend. And I realised I can't get those days back. They're gone. But I had been taught and expected to live as if that was permanent, that was the truth. And then I dared to do something even more challenging. By this stage, I'd been in the system 20 years. And I multiplied that out. $6,405 days that are gone, missing in action. And why this might be a motivating force to go forward, I had to deal with my anger and my rage that came from realising that. And I imagine for many, many people sitting here and many people that are in services, this story will be no different. And every single day that doesn't have to be lived as an illness, are we inviting people into this space as this is their truth? To counteract that, we actually have to create environments where that we all have opportunities to live well. Now, Daryl, where are you? You got some money? Have you got anything in your wallet? I'm just going to pick on Daryl here because he looks like he doesn't spend much on other people, so he probably looks like you got some money. I'll let him give it to me. Have you got $150? Because no, 150, 200? No, 150 will do. I think that'll get me what I want. Thanks. Great. Doesn't know where I live. Okay, $150 buys you guys will be better at telling me this, but probably 45 minutes of a psychiatrist time, maybe half an hour. Oh, I haven't seen one for a while. Half an hour? 20 minutes? I don't know, something like that. How much of a support work will I get? How many hours of this will I get for a support worker? 2? 2? 2 hours? Yep. Psychologist? 1 hour? Cheap psychologist. So, okay. Now, I want you all to think about the last time you were distressed. The last time that kind of life was getting on top of you. Because the fact that you're here, the fact that you're human, I know that you've had those times. Andrew, if I gave you $150, what would you buy with it to alleviate your distress?
A couple of bottles of whiskey.
Chris, what would you buy with it?
Dinner with Chris Martin.
Dinner. Naomi, what would you buy with it? And what would that do for your distress?
I'd sit on my deck, have a glass with my husband, and count up the things.
So relationship, time, $150. What would you do with it if you could buy what you wanted to alleviate your distress?
I don't know.
Wow.
Money can't buy love.
Money can't buy love. Where would you find love with $150? Maybe. It's your minds that went there, not mine. I'm thinking it might find some places that you might meet someone, possibly. It's an interesting question.
Oh, a restaurant with a family.
A restaurant with a family, wow. The wine. Have you got anyone else that's not in AA here?
Chocolate.
Yeah, how would that alleviate your distress? That's good chocolate for $150. Yeah.
Temporarily, while I have a spree with the rest of it at a lock shop or something.
Yeah, okay. So shopping.
Yeah.
Shopping is really good. What is it? Thanks, Dale, for that. I'll just kind of simulator. What would you buy with yours? $150. Well, the $150 I've now got of yours. Out for dinner. Yeah. No one has told me that you'd buy the services that you're providing or the services that you're receiving with that. Wow. What does that say? It says that we actually know what helps. And most of the things that help us aren't in a service. I found this slide that I think some of you might like. But I also want to kind of be a bit more provocative because it's also cheaper than a social worker, than a psychologist, than a peer worker, than an OT, than a support worker, than a nurse. The things that actually help us to stay well, some of us are probably looking for those things in services to provide, and that's not their core business. And we've lost the art of finding those things in natural spaces and using the expertise of services for what they should be doing. And so the danger is that we've started to live, love, work and play in a service as opposed to being in our own life. And unfortunately, some of the funding models that we've got out there have also tempted services to invite us to live, love, work and play in services and resist kind of supporting us to stay in contact with these natural supports. So we all have boulders. And boulders are things that get in the way of our life. We wouldn't be human without them. And most days, all of us, even those of us with a mental illness, overcome them, minimise them, influence them to a point that they don't stop us. The only reason someone would come to a service is that the boulder that they're trying to influence with the initiatives that they've got in their natural environments isn't working. And that the boulder is too big for themselves, for their natural supporters, and for the community to support them with. So therefore, they come to a service, but they come to a service not to keep their boulder intact, but to actually help realise their potential, to help minimise it, to influence it, to shape it, to shift it, to shrink it. If I'm walking into a service with a boulder that says I'm struggling to meet people, or I'm struggling around fear, or I'm struggling about organising my thoughts, I don't want to leave with all these service groups and initiatives tacked onto me and I've still got this boulder. The thing I want to leave with is I can actually shrink this to the point that I can go and have those things as I'm naturally designed to do. So services, if we take something out of Stephen Covey's work around, we have to begin with the end in mind. If we start creating environments and opportunities for people as if there are no exit points, that'll become a truth. We have to begin with the end in mind. I was in Queensland with a director of a service up there, and he had a blueprint for this new service. And a couple of my team was with me, and they wanted some opinions. And he had it all mapped out that there'd be only one door you came into, and you could get any service you want, from domestic violence to child safety to mental health to housing. And he was very proud of this space. And he asked us to poke some holes in it. And one of my colleagues sat there beside me and said, "I can't see the exit points." He said, "You've got lots of ways in, but you've got no ways out." Interesting. Have we created exit points? Have we created, to begin with the end in mind, that citizenship is actually the exit point, not serviceship? So when we come into a service, one of the languages that I hear is that our role as service providers is to empower people. Who would put their hand up and say that is one of their major roles in people's lives, is to empower them? clue. So what are the rest of you doing? Why is our role to empower people? I'm getting a feeling you think I've given you a trick question. Do not answer this in the affirmative. Is it a trick question? Yeah. So quite often, we think as services, our job is to empower people because we don't think they've got anything to empower themselves with. And so we think we'll create opportunities that I will empower you. This word is problematic. We can only disempower people. And some of the environments that we've created in the terms of illness-saturated environments directly disempower my sense of who I am. Directly tell me that I'm different. Directly give me a pathway that's different from everyone else in the community. So instead of going to the fishing club to fish, I go to the mentally ill fishing club. What, do we fish differently or something? So when we start with, if we want to start with the end in mind, we would never create an environment that sets a pathway that will end in my sense of institutionalisation or my sense of difference. So I've played with this word a little bit. I had to write about it. And I just took the EM and I changed it to me, power. Our role in our own life is to find our own me power. The roles of others in our lives primarily is not to get in the way of our me power, but to create opportunities where our me power can flourish. So to that end, you're going to really think that I've gone a little bit. All services, all of us need to protect the egg, the integrity of the egg. This is an analogy for me. It's an egg is natural. An egg is strong. You ever tried to, I've never tried it, but they tell me that you can't break it by pushing at both ends. They're right. An egg is strong. Why the egg? So the egg has three parts, and I failed biology pretty spectacularly, but if we think about the yolk being ourselves, we bring a lot to our own lives. We bring out all our own qualities, our determinations, our hopes, our dreams, our expectations, but our own resources, our self-determination, our humour, our stubbornness, the things that actually help us to kind of navigate our life. Everyone has a yolk. The white bit, someone's going to have to help me with that name, albumin, you passed biology. That bit, I think, is our natural resources. They're the natural supports, the natural resources. The people that aren't paid to be in our life. Simple definition. If you are paid in someone's life, you're not in the white. You're not in the white zone. And it's really sad when people start to name the closest things in their life are their psychiatrist, their case manager, their support worker, their peer worker, and they've all saturated up the white space. They don't belong there. The shell is our community, our context. It's the place that we get to live, love, work and play. It's the place that we've got opportunities. It's the place we have expectations. Services such as mental health services, drug and alcohol services, homelessness services, any services probably that we're connected to in this room, don't belong in the egg. It's a bit challenging, isn't it? So if they don't belong in this natural space, our service is artificial. I think we are. I think services are artificial, but useful. So when we think about services not being in the egg, our role is to protect the integrity of the egg. So what happens if the yolk, if things are struggling, and even the white, the natural resources are struggling, we have an artificial resource, like life support. Someone who needs life support, you're not going to say, oh, no, you can't have it. It's like we need life support in order to get well, in order to get back with our life. In mental health services, the challenge here is to never, ever crack the egg. Because if we do, Andrew, could you come and hold a glass for me, please? I've never done this before. If it works, I'll take the credit. If it doesn't, it's a good experiment. So if this is a service out here, and we think that we've got to go in and respond to the yoke, to fix the yoke, the only way in the only way in is to crack it in order to respond to it. So what happens is that we get inside and get to the yoke and we crack it, but we've actually destroyed community possibilities and opportunities and natural relationships in the process. So when we work with a person, we have to think that they live in the context of their relationships in a community. So if we're providing a response that is replacing something that is natural, a relationship that's natural, we've got in the way. And we've actually destroyed a pathway for it ever to be connected back together. And so the only option a person has is to live in that environment. So the challenge here is that when we create service responses that respond to the illness, what happens is we create a house for it, we take it on group outings, we treat it differently, we give it a name, we invite it into our service. The concept of the it gets bigger. The concept of the me, all the things that I had in my life, go to the background. This is constructed. If we can construct, and they're microaggressors, as I said, that they happen and they're tiny and they eat away at us like a cancer to the point that it transforms us and we've forgotten how we did it. If we can construct chronicity, we can construct well-being. You still have an it in me, but this time you're responding to the person rather than the illness. So how do we create environments and possibility where we're supporting the person? How do you take your child to school despite the voices telling you not to? How do you go and participate in the local fishing group and resist providing a service fishing group just because it's easier and convenient? A story around this, I was teaching this to people with a lived experience, and Justin was a guy that was listening to this over and over. It took many months for him to get it. And he came back to this workshop and he said, I've got some news to tell the group. And he said, my case manager rang me this week to see whether I'd be ready on Tuesday to go to the tennis group. And he said, I hate going to this tennis group. He said, because it's on a Tuesday at 11 o'clock when everyone else is at work, so they know that I'm a no-hoper. And secondly, it's after the Let's Do Lunch ladies have finished their tennis group, so we get the court after them. And I go with everyone else from the service who I have no connection to anyway, and the case manager picks me up in a Govey car with Queensland Health down the side and drives me to the tennis court. And he said, I suddenly realised why I don't like going. And so when his case manager rings him up and said, I'll pick you up at Tuesday at 9, I'm picking up everyone after you, will you be ready? And he goes, I'm not going to tennis this week. And she started to think, that he's getting unwell and he's sabotaging his treatment. And he said, I'm not going to tennis because I don't want to have to take my it to tennis. And she thought he was really getting unwell because she knew nothing about the it and the me. And anyway, he said to me, but I still like playing tennis. It's something I've done since I was a boy. So what he did, he rang his sister on the Sunshine Coast, who lives in one of those posh gated communities where you've got to have a number to get through, and they've got this pool and the tennis court out the back. And he said, hey sis, can I come play tennis with you on Tuesdays night? Because I can play tennis with you and I don't have to bring my it with me to play tennis with you. You get it? So it's so subtle changes, but the biggest difference is that for Justin, he was able to renegotiate his relationship with his difference to his relationship with his sameness. Now, services are getting this stuff. Services are working really hard to try and change the environments. But because we've spent 200 years creating modern institutionalised environments, it's not easy. So I want to share a story about a leader who had a program that they'd been running a walking group for the last 10 years. Same time, same day, same place, 10 years. And people religiously got up there, ready to walk together, and challenged them, what, do we walk differently too? Anyway, she got this. She said, oh, but I'm going to change it. I'm going to change the environment. Hopefully that will create different possibilities. So she went to the group and she said to them, so I've looked up the internet and I found that the healthy walking group run by the Hout Foundation is running from the local shopping centre. It happens to be at the same time on the same day, just a couple, kilometres away. How about we join their group? And she was expecting them to go, oh, yeah, that'll be good, we'll do that. And they'd still do it as a group, bit of safety, we'll just go en masse. And one guy said to her, but would they want us in their walking group? Now, Chantal was very tempted to go, oh yeah, sure, and just make it happen. But she realised something really important. She realised that the service had reinforced her sense of difference to the point that if she just made that change, took away the walking group and made them go to this other one or invited them to go to this other one, that they couldn't go. Because I can't go and participate in something in the mainstream if I think I'm so different. So she realised her work then was to help this group re-establish and reclaim their me instead of their it. And then that was the real work, not the walking group change necessarily. So we can kind of get a bit overzealous with this stuff, that we can kind of go, oh, let's just change all the groups and take them all away, and then no one's got any platform to do anything with. So we've got to think really clearly about how do we create environments in the first place that don't replicate what's existing. And those environments that we do create from a service position, how do they lead a pathway to natural? So if they don't leave a pathway, if they're a U-turn, there's no exit points out of it, don't start it. So the most important thing we have to think about in the design is how do we support someone to move to natural, and that they want to move to natural, that they've got the skill base here and they naturally move on. In another organisation, a sad story that probably you know very well is that when we're rich with resources, it's so easy to create it or illness-saturated environments. We've got the money, we've got the resources, it's easy, we invite people in, we can count the bodies in, we can organise it, we can report on it. Anyway, this one service provider leader, she had tears in her eyes when she told this story, because this story helped her to transform a practice. And it was in Queensland, and the government had provided this man with a lifestyle support package. He was coming out of a long-stay institution. And the workers were busy setting up his house, buying the furniture, going around, organising it all. But they were getting annoyed. They were getting annoyed about his sister. Now, his sister lived in Canberra, and his sister had travelled from Canberra to Brisbane and taken 3 months' leave to be with her brother as he came out of this institutional life, and to be with him and to support him. But she was going around helping him to buy the furniture and pick out the stuff, and they were colliding. Anyway, the team put a complaint into the team leader, saying, we've got to get the sister out of the way. Anyway, the team leader thought, yep, I'll go and talk to the sister and say, look, we're paid to do this. This is our job. You don't have to do this. You can just be with your brother. We're the ones that are paid to do this. This is our role. So she sat the sister down and she talked to them about, this is our role, this is what we've got money for, this is what we're doing. You're probably just duplicating and confusing your brother. And her sister said back to the team leader, his sister said back, I am his sister. He is my brother. This is something that a sister would like to do for her brother. And I will be here long after you guys have given up and gone home. So I think sometimes we become the moving service, and we move into people's lives, and it's a one-way moving service. I have a friend in the UK who's a consultant, and she says, we simply invite ourselves into people's lives and take up space in their living room, and we don't know when to leave. The problem is we can take from this message that services don't have a role. They have a great role, but it's not replicating what's already natural. It's about helping us to transform, to self-right, to reclaim over the challenges that stop us living in that natural space. And once we've got that skill set back, once we've got that capacity back, it's able to say, thank you very much, I got it now, I got it now. So to finish this conversation today, I want to leave us with a little video. It's only 3 minutes, but it's powerful. Some of you will have seen it. And it's called Credo for Support. Who's seen it? Oh, well, a couple of you have seen it. That's good. I want to say at the front, it's not mine, it comes from Canada, and it comes from people with the lived experience of disabilities. And it's powerful because it's asking us as the other, sometimes in people's lives, to think about how we position ourselves and what role we have. I have to put a warning about this. It's provocative, it's challenging. It challenges me every time I watch it, and sometimes I have to hang my head in shame, and sometimes I go, I think today I got a little bit of that right. So if you're feeling kind of with it, that's okay. It's just a stimulus, and I hope it can be an ongoing conversation. Are we able to take the lights down at all? So I think reminds me when I watch this about that we are all joined by our sameness, not our difference. And we can only do to another person, we can only treat them differently if we actually see ourselves as different. So to come into someone else's life, we also need to know that we're on the same journey of reclaiming a life, of being a citizen, that the struggles that someone has that we're supporting are the same struggles that we have. And in that we find a joined up humanity, not to see people as different. So when I think about the work that I do in my own life about reclaiming, and probably the same work that you do in your work of reclaiming, and also the same work that services need to create possibilities and environments for, that help us to connect to this so that we're not a permanent fixture in services. There's 5 things, and I've brought it to 5 because my hand can only stretch to 5 things and to remember them. We have an obligation to create an environment where there are more possibilities for me to recognise my hope, my sense of future and potential outside of an illness than my permanency of illness and distress. We have an obligation to create an environment where we invite people to be active in self-directing, self-determining and using their internal qualities, that they name themselves, their me power, as the reason for their change, and that they resist naming services or other people as the reason for their change. That we are prepared to take a backstage credit than an onstage bow for the credits that people make in their lives. In the environments that we create, both in community and services, to find ways that invite and recognise that people do want to be able to respond to their needs. No one is put on this planet to say, oh no, I don't want to take responsibility. We may have learnt that, we may have become frightened about that, but ultimately all of us want to be in control. And learning, none of us can shift if we can't make meaning, if we can't make sense of the world. So if your meaning about my distress is locked up in a file, maybe there's an invitation for you to share that with me, and together we can make new meaning and different meaning in order for me to go forward. And finally, and most importantly, the thing we've been talking about here today is to be vigilant, super vigilant, because we've got such a risk of services creating disconnection than connection. That where do our services create invitation for a person to participate in their community, in their life, and not participate as a service recipient, a consumer, a client in our services? Thank you very much.
As Helen indicated, this is the start of it's a continuing conversation that we're wanting to have. And if you're around this afternoon, Helen's happy to continue the conversation with you at our Collins Street office from 2 o'clock, where she'd further explore some of what she's been outlining to you. Sue's got a lot to answer for, hasn't she?
Yeah. It's interesting. I was doing some work with the Salvation Army just recently, and in the Brisbane office, and I asked them about where Sue is, and Sue was this guy's boss in Sydney.
Wow.
And I made a connection through LinkedIn, and just this reconnection about, I want you to know the role you played in my life. Yeah.
The power of those 2 words, so what? And I hope that might be a question that you might take away from today. I'd encourage you to have a look at the brief and look out for the full report when it comes out by the 28th of October, as we point to some of these. There are clearly some important lessons for us to learn as service providers where Helen's talked about services saturation, and we need often to get out of the way to protect the integrity of the ed and let natural supports take over. Can you join me in thanking Helen again? Thank you very much for coming. I hope you have other opportunities to mark Mental Health Week. And if you haven't got lunch booked in, then please take some food on your way out. But thank you very much for coming.